which is why we're here today. And that is the first of a series of power hours that we are hosting over the summer and into the autumn. Knowing that we can't all get together, we still think it's very important to be able to communicate and learn about some key issues in our industry. And we thought it would be very opportune to invite one of our key contacts within government, who's Fergus Harradence. Now, Fergus we've known for a few years now, and just to give you a little bit of biog before the presentation, as you can see from the screen, he is an official at the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, or BEIS as we know it, working in the sponsorship of the construction sector. Despite looking very young on his picture there, he's been in the civil service since 2000, so that's 20 years up, and has worked in a number of departments in a range of economic policy roles. So that includes trade policy, export promotion, innovation, and the exciting thing of corporate tax. His current responsibilities include BEIS's policies to help improve the performance of the construction sector, which I think is pretty close to our collective hearts, and the department's contribution to the government's house building ambitions and its relationship with the Construction Leadership Council, and Fergus will be talking a little bit about that. So what we will now move on to is the main part of the day, and I say Q&A after the session, so we can go on to the next slide, and we'll invite Fergus to just give us a briefing on some of the key issues at the moment which are crossing his desk.
Thank you, Rob. Good afternoon, everybody. I won't give you a recap on me and my career, as Rob has already covered that, but just to explain what I was planning to cover today, I'm planning to just set out the impact of COVID-19 on the construction industry and what the government and the Construction Leadership Council have done in response to this, and also hopefully provide a little bit of a forward look about what it is we're planning to do in the future. Next slide, please. So just quickly look at the impact of COVID-19 on the construction industry. Unprecedented is probably the most overused adjective in the English language at this particular point in time, because it seems to pop up every time everybody mentions coronavirus. So I won't use the term again, but I will say that the impact of COVID-19 has been significant and dramatic on the construction industry. We have never before, and I include within this the impact of the recession following the financial crash in 2008-2009, seen a situation where the level of construction output has dropped by about 30% in the space of a single month, which is effectively what happened over the period between about the middle of March and April this year. And this has been something that has had obviously a tremendous effect on the industry, and it was right across the board. So you saw an impact on investment in housing, also in infrastructure, particularly in industrial and commercial construction, and then obviously as well in private housing, repair, maintenance, improvement, the kind of work that people undertake in their homes. Of those sectors, the ones that have been least affected have probably been the infrastructure sectors. I think the main reason, well, there are two main reasons for that. Firstly, a lot of the work that's done in relation to infrastructure is actually essential. You need people who are maintaining roads, rails, power lines, making sure there aren't leaks and water mains, etc. This work simply has to be done in any circumstances. And then secondly, I think the fact that it is relatively easier to implement social distancing and other safer working practices on some of these infrastructure sites than it is on some other types of construction site, for example, where people are working, fitting out a shop or a pub, or they're doing work in people's homes where inevitably they're in closer proximity with people. The risks of coronavirus transmission are high. It's harder to apply the social distancing guidelines. So in terms of the subsectoral impact of COVID-19, what we've seen, as you might expect, is that the most significant impact has been on investment in private new housing and commercial construction, which includes things like the leisure, retail and hospitality sectors. All of these are now starting to improve, but we have to take account of the fact that we are trying to pick up from a very low base. And the best projection that we have at this point in time is that it is likely that overall construction output in 2020 is going to be about 25% less than the historic norm over the past few years. And that is a figure that does assume that there is a sustained recovery over the remainder of the year. And that would not account for example, a significant additional spike in coronavirus cases, which required another lockdown of one sort or another. Next slide. So in terms of what that actually means for businesses, again, a very significant impact. We estimate that around about 54,000 construction businesses, that really means 1 in 8 firms across the industry are at a high risk of insolvency. In terms of the construction contracting workforce, 7 to 14% of workers are at risk of redundancy over the course of this year. In real terms, that means somewhere between 170 and 280,000 jobs. This really is applying across the whole industry. The product manufacturers and the merchants are telling us that, and also the consultancy sector is telling us that. They, similar to the contracting workforce, think around 10 to 15% of their employees are likely to be made redundant. And what is quite worrying is that when we're looking at redundancies, you're going to see that there is a disproportionate impact on the people who work for small and micro businesses, which are the most financially vulnerable at this point in time. And what that means, looking to the future, is that there are significant risks to things like investment in apprenticeships and currently partly trained apprentices being made redundant, but also actually to graduate recruitment. So there is a risk that in responding to the pressures of the recession and the downturn in the short term, firms compromise their ability to deliver services in future, and you're building in a longer term structural weakness to the industry. And the big imponderable, because we don't have very good data out this, except for in relation to the overall numbers, is what does this mean for the self-employed? Because in the construction contracting sector, there are 900,000 of them. And again, if you look at what's happened in previous recessions, what typically happens when there's a strong downturn is people leave the industry. And then when things pick up, particularly if they're older workers, they tend not to return. So what we could be seeing again is a shrinkage in the overall labour force construction, which has consequences in a labour-intensive industry, and is also likely to create particular blockages in particular geographical areas, and also potentially skill shortages across the board. Next slide. This slide just simply sets out what we think the future may look like in terms of the recovery from COVID-19. I mean, the graph shows very starkly how precipitous the decline in activity was from where we were in February and March this year and where we were over the course of 2019. We are seeing activities starting to pick up within the industry. The current forecast that we have and the central case scenario that we are working to is that there is going to be a tick-shaped recovery. This, as previously mentioned, does assume that there is neither a significant impact from the need to have widespread lockdowns due to a second widespread outbreak of coronavirus, and also that there is no significant disruption consequent on Brexit. And it also, I think, assumes that there will be sustained investment across the public and private sectors in construction activity. But even if you assume that all of those factors are in play, you are still really seeing a 2-year recovery period until we get close to anything that really looks like the historic norm for construction activity in recent years. So the story of 2020 and 2021 is likely to be that we are in that recovery phase. And I personally would say it would also be prudent to assume that there will be at least some bumps in the road and minor disruptions, even if these are only at a local level. Next slide, please. So in terms of what is actually going to drive the recovery, what I think we can say with a high degree of confidence in the short to medium term is that this is very likely to be led by activity in three areas. Firstly, infrastructure, as previously mentioned. Two reasons for this. Firstly, that this is the subsector that has been least disrupted by coronavirus, and all the figures that we've got about sites being open and the level of output and productivity on those sites tend to bear out the fact that infrastructure has been less affected than other subsectors. But also secondly, obviously the government had some quite ambitious spending plans in this area as set out in the National Infrastructure and Construction Pipeline. It was over £600 billion. And we've also taken steps to accelerate that spending recently, and this is going to be sustained. Secondly, you've got a lot of investment going into housing on the public sector side via Homes England, but also currently on the private sector side in terms of new housing. A lot of sites had started, they were partially complete, or at least work had commenced on them. And we think that over the next 6 to 8 months, you're going to see significant activity on those. The real question for the new housing sector is what happens in 2021 and whether you see sustained investment. And I think that is really an imponderable question, and it's tied up with the wider health of the economy and the wider levels of activity within the housing market. And then finally, and this certainly should not be underestimated, from the perspective of the construction supply chain and keeping merchants and product manufacturers in business, it's actually the contribution that is being made by individual householders investing in home improvements. This really has been one of the slight surprises of what's happened in the last few months. What we seem to have seen is that because people have not been spending money on other things that you might expect them to over the course of spring and summer, and the fact that a lot of people have been at home either on furlough or working at home and have had a bit more time on their hands absent the commute, you've actually seen both retail sales in builders merchants, so things like DIY, increasing very dramatically, and also people investing a lot more with small tradesmen in terms of getting various jobs done around the home. And this has been a significant driver of activity, and it really is very important in terms of ensuring that the construction supply chain continues to function. Because I think absent this demand, you would be seeing product manufacturers reducing their operations quite significantly. And you would also be seeing the same, I think, for some of the builders, merchants and suppliers as well. And our expectation is that these are the sectors that are going to continue to drive recovery for the foreseeable future. We would hope that there will be a recovery in commercial and industrial investment over the course of 2021. I don't think it is likely to happen before then, for all of the obvious reasons around the impact of social distancing and the fact that businesses in those sectors have been shut for some time. They don't have the cash to invest, which will mean that you can expect that investing in getting a bar or your hotel refurbished is going to be very low down the priority list for most firms. Next slide. In terms of the risk to recovery and what could actually jeopardize, I think the single issue of most concern to us has to be that as a result of the disruption to the operations of construction clients, public and private sector, there was a huge drop in the number of projects being tendered, the number of contracts awarded, and the value of contracts being awarded over the period between about April and June. Now, this is starting to recover and to pick up again, but we are not anticipating that we are going to be seeing the normal levels of contract awards for quite some time. And what I think this points to is that there is likely to be a slight blip or downturn in activity towards the end of the year. What we are hoping is that recent initiatives will mean that the longer term pipeline is safe and secure, and that will enable companies to get through this blip. But certainly, I think at some point in the latter part of 2020, you are going to see the impact of the fact that these tendering and contracting processes were disrupted as organisations lost staff to coronavirus, or simply had to change the way in which they operated themselves in order to adapt to it and to facilitate everybody working at home. So this is something that I think is probably one of the biggest risks to the industry, and it's particularly significant for the recovery because this does have a big impact on the infrastructure sector, which, as previously mentioned, is one of the subsectors that we are looking to be a real motor to drive us out of the current economic downturn. Next slide, please. And then I think this really just illustrates the point about the number of tender opportunities. This slide is slightly old now. It's about 5 or 6 weeks old, but it was the projection then about what we thought was going to happen. Things now are looking slightly better, but we are certainly not seeing the level of tenders that you would expect to see at this time of year. One of the things that we are doing to monitor the health of the industry is working with Construction Line, the accreditation pre-qualification body. They have a fantastic data set on an online platform that we have access to, which enables us to pose questions to individual firms, which gives us very good near real-time data, not only about the picture for the construction industry at the macro level, but also in relation to subsectors within the industry, large firms and SMEs, firms in different geographical regions of the UK, and really ones that are everything from your small independent builder or tradesperson right the way through to your much larger firm. And in terms of the 3 things that they have consistently told us would really make a difference to them at the moment, it is, as you would expect, things that will help them to manage cash flow, so payment of outstanding invoices and shorter payment times. But interestingly, in relation to contracts and the delivery of projects that has been disrupted by COVID-19, at this point, most people seem to be more worried about project deadlines, missing milestones in the schedule, and the possibility of disputes being triggered or them becoming liable for liquidated damages than they actually are about having an argument with their clients or other firms about excess payments to cover costs related to coronavirus. Now, we assume that will happen at some point, and one of the reasons it hasn't happened yet is that people are still doing the sums in relation to the impact of this. But at this moment in time, people seem to be more concerned to manage, if you like, the legal liabilities that they might incur as a result of the contracts that they've signed up to. Next slide, please. Moving on, just to talk a bit about what it is we have done as government working with the Construction Leadership Council. In March, when it became apparent that the effect of coronavirus on the industry was going to be profound, the CLC set up a coronavirus task force where we have tried to bring together representatives of a very wide swathe of the industry and a wider swathe than we usually engage with. So we've got everything across the whole construction supply chain, from builders, merchants and product manufacturers through to consultants, with large and small contractors, specialist contractors, home builders, all represented as well, in addition to my department, BEIS, and also the Infrastructure and Projects Authority. And we also work closely with other departments that have an interest in this, including the Department for Transport, Department for Education, the Ministry of Justice, and the Ministry of Defence, as well as our colleagues in the Treasury. And really, I think that the work of the task force has fallen into 2 phases. In the initial phase, our focus was very much on providing industry with accurate and high quality information about various government schemes that exist to support it. So the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, etc. And also, because construction was never shut down, supporting the industry to work safely on site. So we've developed a whole suite of products, including the site operating procedures for construction sites. We've also worked with the Federation of Master Builders and some of the organisations that represent smaller builders to develop resources for that end of the industry and for working safely in homes, most recently the Work Safe Work campaign. And we've also got operating procedures for branches of merchants and suppliers, as well as factories and product manufacturers. In addition, we've been working closely with the Construction Industry Training Board to look at support for the workforce and particularly for apprentices and how they can use their funding and also change the levy that they are taking off firms to reduce the financial demand on companies and to preserve employment within the industry. We've also issued various bits of guidance where we've tried to support firms through, for example, issuing guidance about responsible payment and contractual practices, the development of a toolkit which enables people to assess the costs of COVID-19 and make some provision and to make claims relating to this in a standard way, which will make it easier for the industry and make it easier for firms, as well as keeping people up to date with more general developments in the industry. And I think that was the phase that really lasted from March to the middle of May. However, the focus since then has really been on the topic we'll cover in the final slide, which is our roadmap to recovery, which we published at the beginning of June, and what it is that we can do now to actually support the industry to recover and to get back to the levels of activity that we've seen in the recent past. And also, as we do that, how we build a stronger and more sustainable industry. So next slide, please. And this is the final slide. Just to set out what the plan covers, it is a three-phase plan, which we think will cover approximately the next 2 years, so the period until 2022, when we hope recovery will have fully taken hold. It's roughly divided into three phases, which are not intended to be a rigid straitjacket. They're really more of a tool for prioritisation and the sequencing of activities. So where we're starting is with the phase that we're calling Restart, which is really the period from June to September, where we have really three simple aims. Restarting work on as many projects and programs as we possibly can, increasing activity in relation to those to the highest level possible, and ensuring that the industry can work safely, maintaining the maximum level of employment across the construction sector and its supply chain. And that's why today we're going to be launching things like our talent retention scheme, where we've created a single industry portal for people to post vacancies on, and also for firms to use and point their employees towards when they are shedding staff, with the aim of stopping people falling out of the sector. And then finally, and I touched on this earlier, minimising disruption in relation to contractual disputes and encouraging everybody in the industry to behave responsibly, because at this moment in time, I think that the last thing that anybody needs is to trigger a whole wave of disputes within the industry, which will drain the industry of cash and occupy an awful lot of senior management time at a point when we have many more and many bigger problems for the industry to deal with. The second phase of work, which it really has started now, but will continue probably into 2021, is around what we call resetting the industry. And this is giving the industry confidence through creating a sustainable pipeline of demand, which we tried to do through the announcement that the Chancellor made a couple of weeks ago on the £37 billion pipeline of activity that covers over 200 individual projects and programmes, but also some of the other work that we've done to stimulate demand in the housing sector, so cutting stamp duty, also some of the related initiatives like the recently announced investment of the Green Homes Grant to promote retrofit. So what we're trying to do is create demand across the industry and really reactivate activity across the whole construction ecosystem. Secondly, we are getting consistent evidence from firms that regardless of what they do, the simple fact that they have to apply new guidelines and operating procedures has reduced output and productivity on construction sites by around probably 10 to 15% on average on most large construction sites. So we are working with the Construction Innovation Hub and also with the industry overall to look at what it is we can do to address that. So are there any techniques that we can learn from other industries like manufacturing? Are there any other ways of greater use of modern methods of construction offsite manufacturing that we can actually introduce to mitigate this loss of productivity and output, whilst at the same time improving the overall efficiency and performance of the industry for the long term. And then finally, a renewed focus on professionalism, which is about investing in training, but more widely than that, moving the focus of training maybe away from some of the functional skills that have traditionally been the focus of this within the industry, and looking at communication skills, behaviours, leadership, management skills, all the things that will help to promote a more collaborative, more efficient, coordinated industry in the future. And then the final phase of this is what we're calling reinvention, which is about getting the industry back on track towards the delivery of some of the strategic policy objectives that we have, either those set out in the sector deal around productivity and better quality of outputs being delivered by the industry, or things like net zero carbon and levelling up, which are wider government objectives. And this is where we are looking to the industry to really start investing in and adopting new technologies, new techniques and new approaches to enable them to do things better, particularly adopting digital offsite manufacturing technologies. We're also looking to shift the focus of the way in which government and also organisations in the private sector procure, to shift away from the focus on lowest cost and an obsession that competition drives the best outcomes when tendering, towards an approach that's focused on delivering long-term value and building stronger and more collaborative relationships with the industry, which could include delivering rather than delivering individual projects, actually delivering programs with the same consortium firms, building on the Project 13 approach, and some examples of where this has been successful that have been done by both Highways England and also Anglian Water. So it's an attempt to try and shift the culture of the industry and the way in which the industry and its clients interact. And then finally, the theme of partnership, which links into the work that we are doing in value, but it is also about the way in which the industry manages its people and looks to ensure that rather than treating them as something of an expendable or disposable asset, it actually invests with them long term, and particularly invests to address some of the things that have been long-term problems within the industry that have not been addressed, things like occupational and mental health. And this is also where we are going to be bringing in much more of a focus on things like building safety. Where you will all be aware of the legislation that was finally, or the draft legislation that was finally published on Monday. But this is going to have a very significant impact on the industry and how it delivers certain types of buildings. And we really see this as being something that can drive a new approach in the industry through having better regulation, greater transparency, more information sharing, and more of a sense of a much less adversarial approach between firms in the construction supply chain, and also between the industry and its clients and the industry and the bodies that regulate it, which I think is essential to making this new approach work. And it's something that Judith Hackett has touched on time and again since she published her original report into building safety. So I will stop there, but I hope that's been a useful introduction into the work that we're going, and I'm obviously very happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
Okay, thank you very much, Fergus, for that. And as I said at the outset, your presentation will be available after. Move on to the Q&A part of proceedings. I think for this one, Robert, you can take that slide down, and if Fergus wants to just put his video on, we can do that.
Can everybody else turn their videos off?
Yes, we've got a little bit of selection of people there. Mr. Campbell, I can see, unfortunately. Richard Teasdale, if you could turn your video off, that would be great.
Mine's just actually a photograph, Rob. It's not a video.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you were being rather static for you, Dale.
It's hard to tell the difference. I know I'm not the most dynamic of chaps. Rob, is my picture?
We can now see the man who's been addressing us for the last 20 minutes or so. So what we're going to do, we haven't had too much traffic on the chat line there, so we're going to open it up to questions. But in classic sort of moderator style, I'm going to just throw in a couple of questions, if I may, to start the ball rolling. I think you said on commentary on one of your slides there, Fergus, that the modelling didn't include anything which we might call the Brexit effect. And obviously at the beginning of the year, the top thing on our agenda was whether there was going to be a good settlement in and around Brexit, and that we could plan with some confidence for next year. Now, one of the things that I think you and I have spoken about not long after the famous referendum was the possible effect of Brexit on the availability of construction labour and some of our guest workers returning home. So what I was hearing was you were saying that there may be a skills shortage anyway, but do you feel that's going to be exacerbated by the Brexit experience, or is the Brexit issue still a bit of a great unknown for us?
I mean, the fundamental challenge that the construction workforce faces in the UK is a demographic one. Third of all construction workers are aged over 50. You could reasonably predict that they are likely to retire over the course of the next decade, a process that might or might not be accelerated by COVID-19. We'll have to see what happens. But it's also undeniably true that there are certain geographical areas, principally London, but also the South East, and certain subsectors, principally housing, which really do depend on migrant labour from the EU and the EEA. And if all of those workers, or a significant proportion of them, left the UK as the response to there not being an FTA with the EU, it's almost certain to be the case that you would see both a labour and a skill shortage in the southeast of England and London, which is likely to have implications for elsewhere in the country, because you've got quite a lot of construction activity in London and the southeast. The expectation is that that would then suck in labour and people with particular skills that it needed from other parts of the country. So there would be something of a shockwave effect that spread across the UK. Quite what the extent of that would be, we don't know. I mean, it's incredibly hard to predict, because COVID-19 makes it intrinsically difficult to predict what the level of construction activity is. But this is certainly one of the top two issues of concern for firms within the construction industry. They have been quite reassured about some of the statements made by the Migration Advisory Committee in the Home Office about the new points-based migration system, and the fact that this will actually facilitate quite a few construction workers with higher level skills coming into the UK. But what they are quite worried about is the impact on lower skilled workers, because again, in London, the South East, we do depend a lot on migrant labour to undertake general labour and lower skilled roles. And actually, they are often trained or trained to a higher level once they've come to the UK. And so firms are concerned that they are not going to have access to sufficient number of workers and workers with the right skills going forwards. Although I would say they are probably more optimistic about our ability to recruit people from the EU EEA than they were maybe a year ago, before the details of the UK's future immigration policy had been published.
Okay, thanks for that, Fergus. I mean, just probably related to it, I know there's the talent retention scheme, which is going to be formally launched a little later today, I think, by the Secretary of State. We'll hear a little bit more about how that will work. Is that going to, as far as you know, is that going to be concentrated purely on construction site workers and skills, or would that spread to the manufacturing side where we are?
We've explicitly designed it to include the manufacturing side, and in fact, the talent retention scheme is an example of us stealing a very good idea that was actually developed in the manufacturing sector, and it's also been used in the oil and gas industry. So when we designed this, what we did want to ensure was that people with relevant skills to construction from all industries would be able to register on and to use the platform. And similarly, firms in a whole range of sectors would also be able to use the platform, because we want to encourage people with the right skills into the industry, and recognizing that there may sadly be a number of people in sectors like the automotive and aerospace sector who've got very good manufacturing related skills and knowledge of the sort we want more of in construction, but who are at risk of losing their jobs. We would quite like to attract them into the construction industry. So yes, it's going to be a completely open scheme for people to use.
Okay, thanks, Fergus. I do have a couple more questions, but I'm going to open it up to anyone who'd like to jump in. Now we've had that opportunity to talk to Fergus while we have his attention. Who'd like to go first? Perhaps either someone from the executive board or someone else who maybe hasn't contributed to some of our previous get-togethers.
Rob, it's Paul. Hi, Fergus.
Hi, Paul.
Hi there. Just really wanted to raise the issue of the trade agreements and the relationship with Europe through Brexit and specifically North America. I mean, both of those areas to the manufacturing base are significant, and particularly with some of the issues that are going on at the moment between the US and Europe with Airbus and Boeing, etc. I mean, just what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I know it's not 100% aligned with UK domestic construction, but it fits along with it. Have you got any specific thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, if I cover the US side of it first, I mean, it's a sad illustration of how long this has been going on, that when I worked in trade policy, which is well over a decade ago, one of the big issues was Boeing, Airbus and aerospace. And about 12 years down the line, this remains unresolved. And there's still another stage in the WTO process to go in terms of the WTO taking a decision on retaliatory rights for Europe in relation to some of the procurement subsidies that the US has been giving Boeing. But my overall observation about the agreement or prospective agreement with the US is it was never realistically going to happen under this administration, this side of an election. US administrations struggle to conclude trade agreements where the president does not have trade promotion authority. In the past, where trade agreements have been concluded, it's usually because there's been a reasonable degree of bipartisan consensus within Congress about the desirability of it. And it doesn't usually happen in election years when the incumbent party is obviously keen to secure what appears to be a big pre-electoral win, and the opposition party, for entirely natural reasons, from a political perspective, wants to deny them that. So I never thought that it was likely that we would make rapid progress in relation to reaching a trade agreement with the US, just because of the politics and the timing of this. And that is before we even get into some of the really intrinsically difficult issues that a trade agreement with the Americans would need to resolve, principally around the issues of agricultural market access and subsidies for the agriculture sector. I mean, you will see all of the debates about animal health and welfare, food standards and other things, GMOs. These have been hugely emotive and difficult trade issues that have held up agreements between the US and the EU for decades. Yes, okay, I think removing some of the more agriculturally focused member states of the EU from the equation in terms of a negotiation does make things easier. But as we've seen with the debate in the UK, these are still going to be very, very difficult issues to resolve. So my view is that, as has pretty much been said by the Secretary of State for International Trade, there's no realistic prospect of an agreement with the US being reached this year. And frankly, I would assume, certainly if there's a change of government in the US, you're not going to see negotiations restarting in earnest until 2021. How long they will take, I don't know. But I would anticipate that with any agreement involving the Americans, it's more likely to be years than months. And then in relation to the EU, I mean, I'm more optimistic that there's the possibility of a deal that can be done than perhaps some of the recent commentary implies. I think the fundamental issue here is that there really is an intrinsic economic logic in reaching some form of agreement, even if it is an imperfect agreement for both sides. And I suspect that both sides ultimately will be willing to compromise in order to secure that agreement. And a lot of the factors that tend to disrupt trade negotiations, which in this day and age tend to be the non-trade factors, it is what's called the level playing field in the context of the EU, things like the competition, the labour standards, the environmental standards. Because we have a common basis for these at this point in time, it should in theory be easier to reach some sort of agreement on them. Now, obviously, an awful lot of politicking has to be done during any negotiating process. And having done several international negotiations, my rule of thumb is that they always have a tendency to fill the time available. So again, I mean, I wasn't expecting an agreement to be reached this side of the summer, but I would be a lot more optimistic that when push comes to shove and we actually get up against quite a hard deadline for concluding something so that it can be taken through the ratification process in the EU, which basically means it's got to be agreed in September at the latest by early October, actually a compromise will be found. The problem is that means that there's another 2-3 months worth of uncertainty for business, which is highly undesirable on top of the 4 years of uncertainty that we've already had. But I'm afraid that is the situation at this point in time, although I am reasonably optimistic that we are going to get an agreement this year, and from that point onwards there will be greater certainty for everybody.
That's great. Thanks very much, Fergus. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Fergus. It's good to hear a little bit of optimism there, and no doubt in some of our future power hours we're going to be looking at Brexit in a lot more detail, as obviously we and others have been doing a lot of work on that, and hoping for some progress anyway. Any other questions from the audience? We'll have to wait a little while because there might be a question, but whoever it is hasn't turned the mic on. Now I'm going to throw one more in. I'm just conscious of the time. We promised exactly an hour, and we're 5 minutes away from that. One of the things that we've talked about for some years is the point you touched on towards the end of your presentation, Fergus, which was the challenge of getting companies to invest and adopt new technology. And that's always been a challenge. We've had our own conferences in the past where the heads of innovation for different contractors and others have pledged allegiance to technology, but the finance guys have always come in and thought of a different solution. Again, we were talking about optimism. How optimistic are you that this could, the current situation, be it Brexit, be it the effects of COVID-19, is actually going to give a push towards that? Because certainly our members have come up with some great technological solutions and new products, but it's always this problem of implementation and adoption.
Well, we can end the meeting on a positive note, because I'm actually quite optimistic about this. And the reason I say that is when we launched the Transforming Construction programme as part of the sector deal back in 2018, we were very unsure about the extent to which the industry was going to engage with this and whether or not firms would be willing to invest in quite ambitious or transformative innovation projects, as well as more routine business as usual ones. We have been really pleasantly surprised by not only the extent of the engagement by the industry in that programme, and it's across the world. There are very few large contractors or medium and even medium-sized firms in the UK that are not involved in this programme in one way or another. We've got a lot of SMEs involved in the programme. We've got SMEs from outside the construction sector and research institutions from outside the construction sector involved in projects and delivering these. And excitingly, it really is the whole sector as well. So we didn't think that there would be much interest from the house building sector, for example. Actually, one of the single biggest R&D project that we're funding as part of this comes from the house building sector, which is traditionally probably the single most conservative subsector within the industry. And we've also had a lot of engagement on the part of construction clients. So public sector, a lot of work from government departments, and you might say, well, okay, they're the home team, so we dismiss that. But actually, we also have land securities actively involved, the single biggest private sector real estate investment trust in the UK. And it is very clear that these clients are wanting to work with construction firms and actually push their supply chain to deliver in new and better ways. And they themselves are prepared to invest in doing this. So I am optimistic that we have, over the last 2 years, well, we're supporting, I think it's about 70 projects. They involve over 200, about 250, I think it is, individual firms and organisations. And some of these are going to come up with really quite ambitious transformative innovations. So I think we have turned a corner in the industry in terms of its attitude to investing in innovation. And I'm hoping that over the next few years, we're going to see more investment and greater adoption of these new technologies. And just final comment on that is that this is not a sector that's traditionally invested heavily in R&D, but between 2017 and 2018, the level of R&D investment by the construction contracting sector pretty much doubled. So it's clear that innovation is something that's at the forefront of the minds of firms in the industry in the way that it hasn't been in the past. And that's true of clients, and that's certainly true of government. And a lot of the work that we're doing on construction procurement at the moment is all about how we can use our buying power to drive the adoption of new technologies, and also to continue to support the development of these and the iterative improvement of the ones that we've got. So yeah, I am optimistic about that. And so I note John has just commented in the chat function and asked a question about getting office staff back to work. This is a movable feast. We just keep publishing guidance as the science changes and as there's a need to do so. I can't give you a definite view as to when government will issue guidance beyond what's already been published as part of the safer working guidance on office staff returning to work. My expectation is, though, that this will continue to be updated, and as we've seen with yesterday's announcements about wearing face coverings in retail premises and things like that, and the need to support the economic recovery becomes even more apparent, and that involves getting people back into the offices. Yes, we will continue to revise and update the guidance and issue that.
Okay, thank you, Fergus. I think the time is now against us. We've just tipped over our 1 hour, but I'd like to thank you very much for your time today, and also for your other efforts on almost on a day-to-day basis. So thank you very much, and also giving us an insight into the wallpaper in your reading, which is much appreciated.
Thank you.
What we would just like to share is what happens next, and so we're going to just switch back to the presentation slide. And we do have another date for your diary, which is 25th of August. We're going to be running these Power Hour sessions throughout the summer and into the autumn. The next one is a very practical one. I think it's to do with increasing cash flow through R&D tax credits. And if you think you've heard it all before, I think some companies maybe haven't. And so we're targeting that particularly to the small and medium-sized companies. And we actually have a case study from one of our members that's going to be shared just to show what can be done in that area. So you'll be getting full details of that. And then on to the next slide. And these are some other sessions that we're now in the pipeline and planning. And you can see from that side, there's a whole variety of things that we're hoping to address. So we're going to do two things really. One is to look at some of the key issues that are around at the moment and share information and ideas. And two is also to supply a little bit of a showcase of some of our members, highlighting some of the newer technologies which are coming through. So watch out for more information on all of that, which then leads me just to one more slide, which is to say thank you very much for your participation today. Goodbye, talk to you all soon, I hope. And please be sure to contact us if we can help you in any way, because we want to give you value for your membership of the CEA. So thank you for that. Have a good weekend when it comes, and so I look forward to talking to you and seeing you in the near future, and maybe in a few months actually in the flesh. Thank you very much.